This is another CarsGuide SUV comparison test, and you can think of it as a sequel of sorts to one we brought you earlier in 2021. Back then we told you we were waiting for this car to launch, the Kia Stonic, so we could put it in a comparison test. And today we're sticking it against segment veteran, the Mazda CX-3. But also for this test we've got a bit of a twist. We're going to throw these two light SUVs in against the Hyundai Kona, which is technically in a size above, to see if it's worth your while going a size up but a spec down. Before we go any further, we're also going to throw some time codes up on the screen now so you can skip ahead to the part of this review that most interests you. And if you're watching on YouTube, there'll be shortcuts down in the description below. If you want to go check out that earlier light SUV comparison test, you can do that over at our YouTube channel, where you can also hit subscribe. And if you are enjoying our videos, chuck us a like and hit the bell notification icon to stay up to date with all of our latest content too. First up, we're going to take a look at what specs we have here. For this test, we've tried to stick to that kind of mid 20 grand region, which we know is the most competitive for these types of SUVs.
First things first, we have our latest arrival, the Kia Stonic. We have it in mid-grade sport trim, wearing the price you see on your screen now. It is the cheapest car on this test, but right from the get-go, it impresses with a high specification level, including 17-inch alloy wheels, keyless entry and push-start ignition, and an 8-inch multimedia touchscreen with wired Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and built-in nav. Next up, we have the Mazda CX-3, which we have in a mid-max sport grade at the price you see on your screen. Once well specified, the stalwart Mazda now falls behind in some areas, but nothing that we think is a real deal breaker. Important items include 16-inch alloy wheels, a 7-inch multimedia screen with wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support, as well as built-in navigation. It's the only car here to score climate control instead of air conditioning. But while it has push-start ignition, it annoyingly misses out on keyless entry. Finally, we have the Hyundai Kona. Technically a size up from its light SUV rivals here, we think you'll be cross-shopping this small SUV anyway at the price you see on your screen. It's a total base model simply called the Kona, and there are some areas where you can tell on the inside. It scores an 8-inch multimedia screen and is the only car here to have wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto connectivity alongside a wireless charger, although it is the only one to miss out on built-in navigation. The Kona rides on 16-inch alloy wheels, but is also the only car here to have a plastic steering wheel, turnkey ignition, and no rear parking sensors. If you want to take a closer look at the specs side to side, just hit pause on your screen now to see the full table.
As always, we know design is a bit of a subjective area. Let us know which of these cars you think looks best in the comments below, but we'll take a closer look at each one and point out some stuff that we think is cool.
The Mazda CX-3 has remained largely the same since it launched years ago, but it's a true testament to its endearing design that it still looks just as modern as the other two cars here. There's also a refinement to its chrome-touched bodywork and the way the brand's swoopy Kodo design language works its way down its flanks, which makes for an upmarket look liked by old and young alike.
Here in the Mazda, and the flash design continues on the inside just as it does on the outside. There's lots of little chrome accents and delicate switch gear and nice touch points, but where the Mazda really excels is the soft top console box and soft trims on the doors, which the other two cars here don't have. There are some things in here that are starting to feel a little bit old though, things like that tiny multimedia screen and some of the other little design elements that have hung around maybe a little bit too long. But I do like the wheel as a nice premium touch point, and the semi-digital kind of dash elements really add to this car's flair.
Next up is the Kia Stonic. There's something modern and fresh about Kia's latest offering, with those gently rounded headlight fixtures and abundance of paint finishes instead of potentially cheap plastic fillers across its bumpers. There's a pleasing contrast between the curved features of its front and rear and the gently squared angles of its side profile, which give it a slight suggestion of toughness.
Inside the Kia, and it's really similar to the Rio it's based on, but that's not a bad thing at all. It does feel quite spacious. There are some tasteful, different plastic trims in here, and while there are some hard, nasty plastics, there's also some nice designs. While it is a little bit less flashy than the Mazda, it has the best media screen of the three cars on this test, and the leather trimmed steering wheel and shift lever are welcome additions too. You sit noticeably low in this car, so it's a little bit more hatch-like in its feel, but one of the giveaways that it is based on a cheaper hatchback is the lack of an electronic parking brake. It's the only car here that doesn't get one.
Finally, there's the Kona. Hyundai has thrown the styling rulebook out the window for 2021, with each of its new vehicles having wildly independent looks. While we like some things about the Kona's new face with its soft edges and interesting headlight clusters, it's a design we think will ultimately polarize onlookers.
The Hyundai's interior most reminds you that you're in a base model car. There's just one big slate of grey plastic trim across the dash, and the wheel is clad in plastic and the shifter is clad in plastic too. But where it's most insulting is that multimedia tablet. There's just all this dead plastic space around the 8-inch unit, reminding you that you didn't splash out for the larger screen. Where it is good though is the fact that it's based on an i30, and that means you get an extra width to the cabin that the other two cars don't have, and an extra height as well, which is really quite welcome. There's also a bit of a quality to the switchgear, which is quite nice, and that's something that the other two cars maybe don't quite have. While we're in the Hyundai, we'll chat practicality as well. You do sit the highest in this car. It has good visibility out the front, but maybe not quite as good out the back. There's quite healthy sized bottle holders in the doors, and there's a healthy sized bottle holder here as well, and a smaller one here to make up for the lack of variable cup holders. This is the only car as well that has a wireless charger as part of a 2-tiered shelf under the air conditioning, and there are two 12-volt outlets there as well. You get a soft clad top box as well, which is decent. Oddly though, even though this car is quite a bit bigger than the Stonic has better practicality in the cabin too. It's just got a larger shelf down here, it's got better cup holders, it's got bigger bins in the doors, and that's a little bit odd to find. The Kona is nice and easy to get into, as you could probably see there, and I do have a nice amount of room for my knees and definitely a nice amount of room for my head, which is probably a bit better than the other cars on this test. There's a tiny bottle holder in the doors here and nowhere else to put my bottle, so I'm going to pop that back there. There's a tiny little tray on the back of the center console and a USB port, but no air outlets, which is a bit of a shame. I've got to say, in the cabin, the Kia is the most practical as well. There's lots of little nooks and crannies in here in typical Korean fashion, but it's even better than the Kona. There's a huge trench down here with a large bottle holder that's too big for even this bottle, and there are two bottle holders in the center, one smaller than the other, just like in the Hyundai as well. There's a nice 2-tiered shelf under the air conditioning here, which is larger than the one in the Kona, although it is missing that wireless charging unit. You do get a 12-volt outlet and a single USB port for connectivity, and you also score a decent, softly trimmed console box as well. Now the Stonic is the car that you have to sort of crouch down the most to get into, and it does have the lowest seats as well. But I'm really impressed with the amount of room in here. I have, compared to the other two cars, leagues of room for my knees, and even the headroom is pretty good despite that low kind of roofline in here. You get one power outlet on the back of the center console, but again, no vents, just like the other two cars here. And there's no drop down center console either, and a small bottle holder in the doors that won't fit our bottle. In the CX-3, and it's the car where you can most tell it's based on a small hatchback, it is very narrow and enclosed in here, but practicality wise, there are still some good points. There's large bottle holders in the doors and large bottle holders in the center here that have a little variable thing that you can also use as a storage bay. There's a large storage tray underneath the climate unit, and there's also two USB ports and a 12-volt outlet for power. Of all the cars on this test, the Mazda is definitely the most difficult to get into, and it's also the tightest on the inside for backseat passengers. As you can see, I'm behind my own seating position and my knees are definitely hard up there. I'm sitting really high up off the ground. I mean, these seats are noticeably stadium and things are quite tight, but where I will give the Mazda props is their soft touch materials on the doors for your elbows, so that's a bit of a plus. The other two cars, again, don't have that. There's also no power outlets, there's no vents back here, but there is a large bottle holder in the door and a drop-down armrest with more small cup holders. It's kind of handy.
Now let's take a look at boot space. Our Korean cars both pull ahead with large boots, although the Kia's is particularly impressive given its overall dimensions. See on screen for the sizes of each. We will point out that the Kona requires its boot to be lowered to make the most of the space, and the CX-3's boot is so small it's the only one here that can't fit our full luggage set. Our Practicality winner is the Kia for having the most useful interior and boot space despite being physically smaller than the Kona. Two of our cars here have very similar engines. The Mazda and the Kona both have 2-litre 4-cylinder non-turbos of similar power outputs. There's nothing unusual here, but the spec should play to the smaller Mazda's favour. The Stonic stands on its own with a smaller 1.4-litre non-turbo 4-cylinder. It's down on power compared to the other two on this test, and we even think this engine is underpowered in the smaller and lighter Rio, so it'll be interesting to see how it fares in our driving section.
The CX-3 really tries to live up to Mazda's zoom promise. It's that kind of tight, low to the ground, most hatch-like feeling of the three cars on this test. It also has the most direct steering with the most feedback coming in from pretty much everywhere. It's a bit of a sensory overload here, but it does that to a fault as well. There's a lot of tire roar coming in, even the suspension is noisy, and the engine is really noisy too. There's just a lot of mechanical noise coming in from the front of this car. Elsewhere though, we found this car is very confident in the corners. That firm suspension does add up to something. Even though it might skid over some bumps with that firm damper tune, it is confident. It does inspire confidence when you need it the most. The engine in this car, being a 2-litre in such a small package, is super capable as well. Although surprisingly, after getting out of the Kona, it's not as confident as we thought it might be. And that 6-speed transmission, it's not the most sophisticated we've driven either. It's a little bit transparent about what it's doing. It lurches through the gears, and it even has a propensity to be a bit noisy too. Some other little things about the Mazda we notice is it is quite hard to control things like Apple CarPlay with the dial selector in here while you're trying to concentrate on the road. And another thing that is worth bringing up is that stop-start system. It's there, but you don't really notice it. We're not really sure that it saves you an awful lot of fuel, but this car did pretty good on that front too. So it's got that strong engine, the really direct steering, the firm ride. We really think this car will suit someone who's more about the drive and less about having that kind of aloof experience that you might get in a family SUV. So behind the wheel of the Stonic, it's evident how good this car is, especially compared to the attributes of the other two. It's also really evident how much this car has been re-engineered over its Rio donor car. There are things that I genuinely wasn't expecting. Things like the steering, which feels much less wooden than it does in the Rio. It's much more linear here, and it really gives this car a nice direct feel. The suspension as well is much quieter than it is in the Mazda, and it's a nice balance of the comfort of the Kona and the sportiness of the Mazda. It sort of falls in between the two, but it's best for everyday scenarios. The kind of scenarios that this car is going to be mostly involved in, driving around on city streets, or maybe on the corners a little bit on the weekend, it's still really suitable too. It's also nice and quiet in here when it comes to that ride as well, and the amount of road noise that actually penetrates the cabin, especially after coming straight out of the Mazda, and that's really nice to see. Another benefit of this car's really confident ride is that it just feels planted. Unlike the Mazda, which can kind of skid over bumps, or the Kona, which tips side to side a little bit, this car is so balanced in the way it approaches bumps and corners. Where this car is let down a little bit is its 1.4-litre engine. It is underpowered. And while you don't really notice it that much around town, where it seems to be ideally geared for, when you ask a little bit more of it, it does struggle, and it does make a bit more sound in the cabin, and it does really fly up that rev range. It is nice to see this 6-speed transmission. It does help this engine's lack of power by providing a few more ratios, and it is quite smooth between the gears, but it is still a little bit indecisive when you are asking more of this car. Overall though, I think the comfort and confidence of the Stonic will be its biggest selling point behind the wheel. We know people are searching for that everyday comfort, that everyday ability, and this car really does provide that, even though it might be a little bit short on the power front. So as you might expect, with the Kona having its larger i30 underpinnings, it does feel bigger and wider and a bit safer behind the wheel in that sense. It does feel the most SUV-like of the three cars here though. You're much more removed from the ground. You have this kind of high seating position and this light steering in its default mode. If you are looking for that comfortable kind of family tourer, this does provide a little bit more of that experience. The ride is easily the softest of the three cars on this test, and as we said, that steering is nice and light too, and that gives this larger SUV a bit of a easygoing appeal. It also has effortless power from its 2-litre engine. It never feels like it's overstressed or underdone. Even though it's the only car here mated to a continuously variable transmission instead of a 6-speed automatic, you don't really notice the negatives. It is just sort of quietly confident, and it just sort of eases its way through the revs without any real rubber bandy negative characteristics that we usually flag with these kinds of transmissions. And while it does have more comfort than the other two cars on this test, in that sense it does have its negatives too, with that soft ride and the tall ride height. It is a little bit busy over bumps, and it can be a little bit unsettled over corrugations. We also found the Kona to be the least engaging when it came to S-bends and corners. It just didn't quite have that low set confidence of the other two cars, and it did sort of feel a little bit more understeery, a little bit less planted. And that is perhaps one of those downsides of going up a size class. You just get that extra height, you get that extra travel when it comes to your suspension, and it's just not quite as engaging to drive. So who would the Kona suit best? We think it's someone who prefers to have a little bit more comfort and would appreciate having that sort of effortless engine that you can kind of forget about. It does have that big, secure SUV feel that we think a lot of family buyers will be searching for.
Non-turbos like the cars featured here tend to use more fuel than their turbocharged or hybrid counterparts, and that was certainly the case on our demo loop. To be fair to the cars here, much of our test loop was best classified as urban, and as you can see, none were stellar performers. It's clear that the engine in the Stonic was at its weakest here. Despite its smaller size, it consumed the most fuel. At the other end of the spectrum, the most powerful engine in the lightest car, the CX-3, consumed the least. Either way, it seems as though every car here could do with a more modern turbo or hybrid overhaul. On the active safety front, each car here has a decent set of features considering their market position, although each makes compromises in some areas. All cars have auto emergency braking and 6 airbags, but only the Mazda gets blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, while the Kona and the Stonic have lane keep assist and driver attention alert where the Mazda doesn't. The Kona scores adaptive cruise control, while all the cars on our test here have 5-star ANCAP safety ratings, though not to the current standards. When it comes to warranties, the Hyundai Kona and the Mazda CX-3 both have 5-year and unlimited kilometre promises. The Mazda includes 5 years of roadside assist and has reasonable service costs, needing to visit the shop once a year or every 10,000 kilometres. The Hyundai includes a single year of roadside assist, but they will top it up with each genuine service. Service pricing had not been released at the time of shooting this video for the Kona, but we expect it won't be far above the outgoing model, which was also reasonably priced. Finally, the Kia shines with its 7-year and unlimited kilometre warranty, still one of the best in the business. Service intervals for the Stonic are 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, but price-wise it's a fair bit above the Mazda. Hit pause on your screen now to see the table of the key ownership facts.
So after all that, do we have a winner? Well, against our 8 scoring criteria, which you can read about in the written comparison over at carsguide.com.au, we do. But before we get into it, we thought we'd look at which buyer each of these cars would ideally suit. First up, we've got the Mazda CX-3 Maxx Sport. Now, we think this SUV is more for the driver-oriented buyer. It is more engaging behind the wheel than these other two. It does have its flaws though. It's maybe a little too firm and sporting to be the ultimate family small SUV, and it is feeling a little old now. Next up, we have the Hyundai Kona. It is bigger than the other two cars here, and we do think it'll suit that family buyer who's looking for the security that extra ride height offers. And it is the most comfortable of the three cars here, if not the most engaging in the corners. Finally, we have the Kia Stonic Sport. We think it offers the best balance of attributes of the other two cars on this test, while also being great value and fun enough to drive too. Which of these three would you choose? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, go read the full written comparison over on carsguide.com.au. And if you are watching on YouTube and enjoyed this video, hit like, hit subscribe, and hit that bell notification icon to stay up to date with all of our latest content.